So one of the things that happened with this mural is that all of the divisions of the company went through a very considered process of how they could adjust themselves to actually fulfill this vision.
Yeah.
And they then created their own pictures for their divisions. We did 16 of these across the company.
Okay.
And we got people inside the company creating them. So some of the Asian artists were electric in the way that they improvised once they saw the template for this kind of story. If you look at it abstractly, the vision's on the right, the current state and the history is on the left, the challenges are in the middle. They copied that same format, but they used their images.
So you're saying that pictures can be a global language.
Absolutely.
That can cut through some of the cultural barriers. So, you know, I was born in Singapore, and I had to do a big culture shock thing when I came over to the U.S. And even now, going back and forth, talking to the business people in the U.S. and then going back and talking in Singapore, it's a different language. In fact, I may even use a different part of my brain. But what you're saying is a very interesting thing, that visual language can help people go beyond those cultural barriers. And as somebody of an Asian ancestry, I know the pictorial format of Chinese characters make us much more attuned to the context and the overall picture. So what are you going to do now?
Well, I want to show you. I will. In Japan, we have a template called the graphic game plan, which basically shows an arrow going to a target over some barriers over a series of stages. So basically, if you look at a team of people, the team itself, and the target, and the tasks, you get a pretty good action plan. This is called the graphic game plan. When I went to Japan, the Japanese people are much more in touch with natural metaphors.
Yes.
And I tried something. I said, what if we did this inside of a natural metaphor where we have the ground, we've got the project, we've got root competencies, we've got the benefits that we want out of the project.
Apples.
We've got pests that attack it here and gardeners that support it here, and it's going to go through some stages of growth. Now, it's the very same template.
Yes.
But it's embedded in a natural metaphor.
Yeah.
And they had no problem doing this. They sent them into small groups. They did it all in Japanese. They reported it back in Japanese. I had a translator who was going through it, but they completely understood this as a formative metaphor. So pictures actually are the lens into systems thinking for most people.
Yes. Now, you have your own visual language. I notice you using different elements, people, arrows, apples. Have you developed a kind of vocabulary for this? Or do you make it up each time?
Oh, no. There's a very systematic thing, and studied the archetypes a lot. So, for instance, circles pretty much universally mean something that's unified. So that's a pretty good symbol for a meeting. Oh. And something that is box-like suggests something that's organized. So you have buildings, in spreadsheets, but when you add a box to an arrow, it's an organized project because arrows move. But if you take that same arrow and make it wavy, it actually looks more like forces, like environmental forces that are working on something. So symbols like this actually have embedded meaning.
Yeah.
And a lot of it comes from the experience of actually drawing the symbol.
And how quickly do people pick this up?
We've been teaching people all over the world how to do this. It's now actually a whole profession. And people, it's like playing the piano or any performance art. It's something anybody can do, and if they choose to do it, that they can learn how to do these simple drawings.
Yeah. So let's take a look at what you're doing here. You've got the symbols underneath, but above that you've got a landscape. Now I see like a sun and a mountain. So,
Well,
what do these symbols bring to mind for people?
well, this was going to be a backdrop of the process of why these murals work. So if this is a landscape, most people who are trying to make change, here's a building here, need to go through some kind of a process to get to the changing situation. So the question that managers face is, how do you keep people held in that there's some kind of order while you're going through all this change? Because you're going to, basically disrupt things.
Yes.
And so what you end up doing is you plan a series of meetings, small groups and big groups, over a period of time. And in that process, you're doing versions of these pictures. So you're doing version 1, version 2, version 3. Meanwhile, all kinds of people are feeding in. But this process holds people into a feeling that it's organized and moving forward. So that's exactly what we did with Yosemite.
Okay, let's go back to the Yosemite picture, and we started with it. So now we've learned some of the language and the symbols and the techniques that were used. Tell us what happened. How did Yosemite use pictures to pull people together to help set priorities in the planning of this precious natural resource that belongs to the whole world? People come from all over to see it, and they all have their opinions about what should happen.
Yes.
So, but we only have a couple of minutes, so let's get into this.
This was a result of several meetings with the top management and Don Newbarker, as well as all of his branch chiefs. And what they did is they basically zoomed in and they said, here is the resource. Now you'll notice on the left is El Capitan, on the right is Old Grizzly, the large sequoia, and in the middle is the valley. Well, to give you an idea of what they argued about with images, this is just one of the wonderful discussions we had. In the center, of course, is their mission and the principles that they work by, but also these sacred images here. You'll notice Half Dome, Yosemite Falls, a little frog that's endangered, and here you have a sweat lodge from the native people. Well, in the original drawing, I had the Ahwahnee in the middle, which is their also treasured thing.
The big hotel there.
And I had the sweat lodge just outside. The branch chief said, no, the sweat lodge needs to go in the middle of the circle.
Yes.
And the Ahwahnee outside. Now, it's not that it's less important. It's just that what is very important right now is their relationships with the native communities in that valley, as well as the endangered species. So every single graphic here matches the words that are up in the sky and allowed them to think both rationally and heartfully.
Yes.
So in some ways what this does is it blends the planning activity with the culture that needs to implement it.
I think there's something about pictures that speaks to our hearts.
Absolutely.
And so when something as close to our hearts as Yosemite National Park has to do planning, then using pictures allows us to bring all our hopes and dreams together so that Yosemite can be what it can be for the country and for future generations.
They went on and had all the branch chiefs do graphic game plans of all of those emphasis areas so they could carry it on internally.
Wonderful. Okay, well, thank you, David. This is a great introduction, and I hope we'll do this again.
Thank you.
Okay.